Hi, I'm Lindsey.
And I'm Charlie.
And this is the Jug O Sip podcast.
You can find the Jug O Sip podcast on YouTube and Spotify every Monday and Friday.
And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and follow at Jug O Sip podcast on all social media.
So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a Netflix show. It's a Netflix cartoon called F is for Family.
It's a Netflix original. It was created by comedian Bill Burr.
Yeah, we're a really big fan of Bill Burr. He's a comedian that we've been following for a really long time. And when did it come out with this show?
Oh, like it was like 2017 ish, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It was like 2015.
2015.
Wow, it's been on even longer than I realized.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so here's the thing. In this household, the Cork and Grant household, a lot of people don't know, besides me, that Charles and I both are comedy nerds.
Yeah, we're very big comedy nerds.
Like, I do stand-up sometimes, but I don't just do stand-up comedy myself. Like, I'm an entertainer as a whole, but comedy was a big influence on my life, as well as Charles. We are both big. We've read comedy books and all of that.
Yeah, for me, I never thought about getting into stand-up, but I've been following comedians specifically for so long that a lot of the things that I even believe in terms of just intelligence and philosophy came from listening to comedians. So when they came out when Bill Burr released F is for Family, and the whole series was basically a giant bit about what it was like to grow up in the 70s, I didn't know it right away, so I didn't start watching immediately, but when I learned it, I was hooked.
I understood the social commentary right away just because of how I was parented by my mom and how Frank interacts with his children. You see a lot of this in like 70s media. And it's proven when you talk to somebody from that generation and how they were parented or how they parent now.
Well, let's talk to them. Let's let them know what F is for Family is really about, because we're kind of dancing around it.
All right, cool. So basically, F is for Family is about a man named Frank Murphy who has 3 children and a wife, Sue, who is pregnant through a couple of the seasons, I think. Yeah,
it's Frank Murphy, who's played by Bill Burr. There's Sue Murphy, his wife. She's played by Laura Dern.
The incomparable Laura Dern, I might add.
Justin Long plays the oldest son, a teenager by the name of Kevin Murphy. The youngest child is a daughter by the name Maureen Murphy. She's played by Debbie...
DeBerry.
DeBerry?
Debbie Derryberry.
It's Derryberry, yeah.
I know somebody with the last name DeBerry. It made me think that.
That's a difficult one.
And then Haley Reinhart plays the second to youngest child, Bill Murphy.
Yeah. Which is interesting. Bill's played by a woman. I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, and let's start. This is a great place to start. The family dynamic in the show is interesting, but not unusual for the time it was like the 70s. So it was like this pretty not unusual for this time. Mm-hmm. You had your 3 kids. You got your husband who works at an airport, trying to just like schlub his way up to the top, and he's just like doing a bunch of shit he hates.
He's also a former veteran.
He is. So basically,
he fought in Korea.
You have your typical father who during the 70s was very like miserable and unhappy, but in his youth and prime, he was a star football player. He did all of this shit. He was he peaked like in high school and like in the military. So now he's middle-aged, fat, balding, hates his family, basically. Like he loves his wife, but his kids make him miserable. He's perpetually threatening to throw them through a fucking wall.
Right.
Like straight the fuck up, like right away 70s parenting.
Yeah, and that was a pretty common thing. If you're out there listening, you know anything about parenting styles in the 70s, it was a lot more aggressive. Yeah. And and a lot of people actually experienced 70s style parenting outside of the 70s.
Right, like a lot of us who were raised by boomers had aggressive parents. Like for me, it was pretty unusual because my aggressive parent was the mother.
Right.
My mother acted a lot like Frank. She threatened to put me through a fucking wall regularly.
Right.
So that was that's pretty common with that kind of parenting. But you can definitely see it reflect sometimes.
Now, the thing that really fascinated me about the show, which is the part I want to talk about the most, is there is this theme of quiet desperation throughout the series. And what I mean by quiet desperation is it's no more complicated than that. It's when you're a person who's in a situation and you're experiencing a kind of lonely, solemn, desperate desperate lifestyle that you can't share with anybody. It's like you have to just keep eating and taking all of this negativity.
Right.
And the show, the reason why I think the show is brilliant is because every conflict eventually comes down to different forms of quiet desperation. And some of it's not the kind of stuff that only existed back then. A lot of it exists to this day, but some of it was specific to its time.
Well, if you look at Frank, he was raised by somebody probably of the silent generation.
Yeah.
And they wanted more for their kids. And what happened was they raised their kids to want more, then their kids wanted more, which ultimately brought on the boomer generation, which would have been Justin Long, like Kevin's character.
Right.
Who grew up and wanted the same things their parents had that or didn't have, that 2.5 kids and the white picket fence and the perfect life. And it drug into the boomer generation, but you see it a lot in 70s parenting.
According to Wikipedia, the silent generation is anybody born between 1928 and 1945. Mm-hmm.
So actually
which is funny. My dad is like 2 years off from the silent generation.
They were either the greatest or the silent, because Frank might have been born in like the 50s. Actually, no, Frank would have been born in the 40s if he was like
Frank
in his
Murphy,
mid-30s or 40s in the show.
I think let me look this up. I think Frank Murphy was born in like the late 40s.
So that would have made him a silent. No, not silent.
Okay,
sorry, it's hard to track all this.
Yeah, it's hard to track, but yeah, keep informed.
So basically, with this sort of parental generation and the whole the silent desperation, is that what you said it was?
Silent desperation, yes.
You see it a lot in shows that take place in the 70s. Like that 70s show, for example, you can see it in Red and Kitty. They want something different in their life. Like what happened was a lot of those people didn't have opportunities of education. They went to the military. A lot of them made choices that they just thought they had to make for obligatory reasons because they had to have a family and they had to do this. They didn't realize they could just like do whatever the fuck they wanted.
Okay.
And it created this thing of like, well, I now have kids. I now have a wife. I can't pursue any of my fucking dreams. So I'm just going to stew on it and be miserable.
Okay. According to this, Frank Murphy was born in Efforts for Family. Frank Murphy was born in 1935. Which that would make
him a silent, which would have meant
he would have got in on near the end of the silent generation.
So his parents probably would have been like
those were the greatest generation.
Now
his parents.
It's interesting that he's silent generation because that might bring on that silent desperation. That generation didn't feel like they were allowed to say what they wanted.
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
They wanted, but they weren't. They didn't feel like they were allowed.
And that's what's interesting because you make an interesting point bringing up his generation. One, silent generation kind of around the silent desperation, but
kind of says it all, doesn't it?
The reason why they call the silent generation silent is because when the greatest generation lived in this country, they lived through things like the Great Depression. They had a harder. Their version of America was
suffered a lot.
Yeah, there was a lot of suffering. Their experience of America was just considerably harder.
Right.
And their children grew up with them, witnessing all of this and living with it. It was typical of people of the silent generation to want to be just like the greatest generation.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were very conformist in that way. And what ended up happening is that they knew that they were coming up on a world of abundance, or they imagined they did. So after seeing their parents suffering, it was the general consensus or common sense, I guess, of the silent generation to give their baby boomer children much more than they had.
Well, it's interesting because my nan and pap were silent.
Yeah.
And I would say to them sometimes, it'd be like, well, doesn't that bother you? Or doesn't? And they're like, well, you just learn to live with it. They got to a point. They just learned to accept whatever the fuck they had.
And that was kind of
because they grew up so poor. But they longed for more. So when they started giving their kids more, it created the entitlement of the boomers.
And that was the hallmark that defined the silent generation. They accepted they accepted what they had, but they longed for more. And they ended up giving all that they longed for to their children.
Which brings us to why Frank might have been abusive to Kevin more so than the other kids. Now, he's kind of abusive to the other kids. He coddles Maureen because she's the girl, which was also pretty common.
Right.
Kevin, the oldest child, he was the one I related to the most. He was the one kid that would tell you to fuck off and he was going to pursue his dreams no matter what. And Kevin got in trouble constantly for sneaking out to do things for his band and breaking the rules. I think Frank hated him not because he was acting up and not appreciating what he was giving him. I think he was fucking jealous.
Probably.
I think he was jealous of Kevin's boldness and his ability to say fuck it to the man, because Frank would have never been able to do that. Frank was a silent generation kid.
Right, but that's why like
that relationship often happened. You'd always have that one kid that was a little rebellious and the parent that hated them.
But that's why I like how the show, it just keeps going back to observing different examples of silent desperation.
And every member of the family has it.
Because there's actually a scene in the show where it actually begins with a flashback of Frank coming back home from fighting in Korea. And while on this flashback, he was sitting in a convertible. He was sitting right outside of his future wife's house.
Smoking a cigarette, looking cool as fuck in his military uniform.
Talking to this kid about how this kid still has his freedoms because of all of the fighting that he just got back from doing. He felt and looked like someone that had the whole world ahead of him.
He felt like a hero.
And here's the thing: by those standards of where the country was at the time, he had the right to feel that way because that's where the country was.
Well, and that's again a very common thing from that generation. When you look at characters like Eric Foreman's father, Red.
Yes.
Even Al Bundy. What does Al Bundy always loop back to? His silent desperation.
Yeah.
He's always like, I was a football star. Yeah, like 30 years ago, Al. Well, but he can't let it go because that's all he fucking had. And that's why he's so resentful to his wife. And that's why Frank's resentful to Sue sometimes.
When that's the thing, the men of the silent generation, especially that era, they back there playing.
Yeah, the girls are playing.
If you hear any growling back there, that's our dog and cat playing. Yeah,
it sounds far more vicious than it actually is.
Yeah, they're best friends.
They've been quiet all day.
Wow, and they pick now to play. Okay,
whatever. I'm just glad they're playing.
But basically, Frank, the thing is about the men of that generation. A lot of them experienced this need for the American dream, and when you think when you're thinking about what that means, a lot to a lot of people. Like for some people, if you're like an immigrant to this country, the American dream could be living in a country that allows you to be financially independent and
have your own house and have a life
and build your own freedom based on the opportunities that could exist here. If you're a black person, for example, the American dream could be just being seen as an equal and relevant human being.
And not worrying about getting shot at for leaving your house.
Someone who generally doesn't have to worry about their life being threatened for existing. That could be the American dream according to black people. Now, according to white men like Frank Murphy,
Al Bundy, and Red Foreman, the
American dream was a nuclear family, a white picket fence. Not necessarily to be rich, but just to be a provider that can take care of his family. Even Disney World was an expression of
the American dream.
This American dream paradigm that was being advertised a lot all over the culture.
That's the whole point of it. It was to market this idea. And that's why the boomers were so hard on us for not wanting to follow that. And we're like, well, that's not the way the world works anymore. You guys are fucking crazy.
Well, it was a little bit more complicated than that.
But it was a little bit related to that.
In the case of Frank, his silent desperation is he felt like he should have had more in life.
Considering what he went... hang on, the cat fell between...
No, she's fine.
Okay.
She does that all the time. She knows exactly what she's doing. Yeah.
She looked like she got... Sorry, our cat slid
stuck
off the bed and I thought she got stuck.
No, she's good.
Okay.
Yeah, but for the case of Frank, so he believes that he deserved more for all that he did. For the chunks of his youth that he sacrificed for the sake of the country. He thought more was coming to him. He was a war hero. He was a football star. And he had the whole world going ahead of him. And all he did was raise 3 kids, go bald, and end up working at an airport and his boss happened to be somebody that he fought in the war with that became an even bigger piece of shit than Frank himself did. And Frank didn't really become a piece of shit.
He's just kind of a dick.
Yeah, he's just got a really bad anger problem. But, it's
not a bad man. He just needs to chill the fuck out.
But really. It was like the realities of what the country didn't account for came crashing down on the silent and boomer generations really badly.
Yeah, it did. And another common thing you see with this, and the 3 examples I used was specifically Frank Murphy. Now, we touched on Frank. He's miserable. That's his silent desperation. We already tracked that he peaked so young and he had the world at his fingertips and he just got married, had kids, and everything just shit the bed. That's actually what the entire title intro shows you.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you look at the title,
flying through the air to this groovy 70s song, and suddenly he's like...
He's come and get your love.
Yeah, and he's getting hit in the fucking face with bottles and draft notices and a school diploma. Like, life hit him in the face and he couldn't pursue his dreams and he couldn't fly anymore.
Right.
Now, with that, I bring over to the silent desperation of the wife of the 70s.
Yeah, let's talk about her.
And the three examples I used in this case, we used Frank Murphy, then I touched on Al Bundy and Red Foreman. Now, they also have something in common. The wife that is just absolutely fucking miserable. Devoted, loving, absolutely fucking miserable.
Yeah, Sue Murphy is one of the many women who was dealing with just the pressures of being a woman in society and not being respected in the 70s.
More so than that, I gotta touch on this for a second. I'm really fucking pissy. There's gonna be some spoilers ahead. I'm very pissy about what went down with Sue in the show.
Yeah.
Sue proceeded to try to have a career for herself.
Right.
Now, in the 70s, that was already a big move. So, this girl's got big cojones. Like, she's a bad bitch, but she's, stifled by being married to this balding asshole.
And let's be specific. Sue's not just a career woman. The woman is an inventor.
I was about to get that.
Yeah.
So she first starts out by selling plastilware, which is this universe's version of Tupperware, which was common for the 70s housewife to sell. They would sell Tupperware, fucking
Avon.
Whatever the fuck they could make to feel like they're doing something for themselves. They would do it, be able to work from home and stuff.
Right.
This chick not only got a job in Tupperware, but she invented a salad tosser, which is like what the salad shooter is, where you like wash it and dry it. Now everybody knows that fucking invention. In this world, she invented it. And someone else took the fucking credit for her work, and
Another woman,
another fucking bitch. The woman who owned the plasticware company screwed her and took her idea.
Right.
This poor chick is not only miserable because her husband's just a screaming asshole that's constantly mad about everything, but she's trying to have a career for herself and create a world for herself. Her whole identity is wrapped up in this fucking dude and their kids.
There is a scene in F is for Family where Sue is sitting in the living room alone, and she sits there and she's thinking, okay, what's the next thing I got to do? Pretty much that's what she was thinking.
Yeah.
And she immediately starts crying.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that happens is because she was hit with the existential weight of what a housewife was supposed to be based on what she was taught in her youth and what it became based on what she grew into as an adult.
Which led to her having meltdowns over like not finishing hanging the wallpaper 12 years ago.
Right.
Or like just small things because, when you don't have a purpose or you don't feel like you're pursuing your purpose, little things can set you off. Now, Now this starts at the top of the pyramid with Frank. And not only does she have her own issues, but most of it loops back to Frank. Now, as the tower crumbles, that brings us down to the oldest child, Kevin, and how his silent desperation is affected by his family.
Oh, Kevin. Kevin.
I wish you were real because I love you so much and I want to adopt you. Because
I got a nephew named Kevin, by the way. Shout out to him if he ever hears this.
That boy, Kevin Murphy, is one of the most relatable fucking cartoon characters I've ever experienced. This boy is so clever and so creative. Like, let's just talk for a second. This boy is in a band and he created that whole like gothic folklore type of rock. I don't even know how you would describe it.
They describe it, I think, as like Frodo rock.
Frodo rock, yeah.
It's basically
which wasn't really popular until you had like stuff that like Black Sabbath leading the way on that.
Which he predates based on the chronology of the show. Like, Kevin technically is very ahead of his time.
And Sabbath wasn't exactly Frodo rock, but there were touches of that, like that storytelling type of energy to it.
Yeah, it's the equivalent. It's the equivalent of
he was like the glam rock early. He was early for glam rock. Is what he was.
Kevin Murphy's rock music can be described as if there was like a rock band that lived in the Shire of the Lord of the Rings. That's and they sung about dragons and elves.
It was
and
like
dwarves.
a combination of that and like a glam rock type of style thing.
Yeah, it had like a glam rock.
Going by the
tone.
chronology, he was like 15, so if he had another 15 years, he'd be coming in just as like
as that got popular.
As like things like Whitesnake and Theatric and like David Bowie and things like that were just starting out.
He would have been right there with him.
He would have been right in the smack dab center because Bowie kind of started all that. Then it went into Prince. Then it kind of had Sabbathy vibes. Like he could have fit into any of those categories.
Right. But that's what that specific thing is what makes it so sad. Yes.
This boy has such depression because his dad's constantly yelling at him. All he wants to do is smoke pot and write music. And like everybody's just hard on him all the time. The teachers at school and like
his band doesn't believe in his vision in terms of his particular style of music.
His siblings fuck with him all the time.
His siblings are always fucking with him because they think he's an idiot. But they think he's an idiot because his dad tells them and everyone around him that he's an idiot.
And I know what that feels like because what you have there is your classic scapegoat, favorite child combo. It's like each kid gets treated differently. And when I was growing up like Kevin, everybody thought I was a fucking worthless idiot because all I wanted to do was talk about comedy and write poetry. I just wanted to be creative.
Right.
But everybody made me feel like I was a loser. And I feel for that kid so much because I feel like he has so much potential. And if someone just showed him that they believed in him, he would just kind of chill out. Yeah. He has a lot of anger because his dad has a lot of anger.
Right. Right. He's just reacting to what he knows, but therein lies Kevin's silent desperation.
You were trying to say desperation again.
Yeah, it all came out at the same time.
And that's and then that topples down to Bill's desperation because Kevin takes all his anger out on Bill.
Now in the case of Bill,
oh, this poor sweet little boy.
Here's the thing about Bill that I can relate to. When I was growing up, I wasn't.
You relate more to him, don't you? Out of all the kids.
Well, and here's the reason why. I was very latchkey as a kid. My mom and dad, they did not live together. They were never married. And most of my life was most of my childhood in terms of my parental experiences with them was kind of eaten up by the two of them fighting over me.
Over every little thing they could.
And I won't go into the full details of that, but essentially what ended up happening is that I ended up fending for myself a lot and being neglected in a lot of ways and just not getting the attention that I needed. But the byproduct of that is something that I struggle with to this day is because I didn't have enough value asserted toward me, about me, I ended up not learning fully how to confront I didn't know how to deal with confrontation all that well growing up as a kid. And the problem with Bill, the through line with Bill throughout the show is people keep referring to him as a pussy. And the reason why is because he's a very sweet kid. He's sensitive. He's a sensitive kid who's a pacifist. But the thing is, he's the middle kid. Nobody values him enough to teach him. He's also deeply
terrorized. His older brother picks on him. He's bullied by this other kid. He dated that other kid's sister, and she was a total fucking psychopath. Yeah. Fucking Bridget.
Oh my God, Bridget.
We'll get into her in a minute. But so basically Bill's silent desperation is he's bullied and all this pressure is down on him because everyone else in the family is just using him as a punching bag.
Yeah, Bill doesn't know. Bill doesn't have the personal value to know that this is wrong. He doesn't have.
He's like 9. He doesn't or whatever. He's like a little kid.
Speaking of somebody that experienced this, Bill is one of these kids that doesn't know that his feelings make sense. He doesn't know that
they're valuable in any way.
He doesn't know that it's okay that that he thinks that these things are wrong, and because he doesn't know that it's okay to go with that, his feelings as the seasons progress, you see them because season 4 is coming out in a few days, but as the
you found out confirmation for sure it's coming out in a few days.
They did the release, but it should be coming out in a few days. They said it was going to be spring 2020.
Fuck yeah!
On Netflix, but
hopefully very soon.
Basically, in season 3, you start to see Bill start to take his anger out on Maureen and his best friend, who is, his best friend has totally different issues, and he's going to grow up very messed up. But,
is that the one with the brother? That's all. Yeah, those two kids are messed up.
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
That's his own fucking sad. Every other kid in that neighborhood is just sad and going in a very scary direction.
Right, but in the case of Bill, Bill doesn't know where to put his negative feelings because nobody cares to listen to him.
And he's kind of just sitting on them.
But the thing is, that leads to Maureen.
Now, let me talk about my girl for a second, Maureen.
Yeah.
She's my second favorite character. And let me tell you why, because she's the one handling her silent desperation the best. And let me tell you why. Maureen is the youngest Murphy child. She is scientifically inclined. She is good with computers, which in the 70s is a huge fucking thing because not only is she a girl, but that was the new idea of technology, really. And the only people who really had computers were like scientists and people at NASA.
Right.
And she wants to work in NASA. She wants to be an astronaut. She wants to do all of the stuff. Now, what I think is going to happen in the direction of Maureen is she's the only one that's not really reacting negatively to her shit. She's actually using it as ambition. You can see it. Even if they don't say it directly, Maureen is constantly like using her annoyance with her family to like grow as a person. Her father says computers aren't for girls. Well, and so did the science club, and they made her be the space secretary on a float. All that's going to do is piss her off to become successful.
Yeah, Maureen's
she's going to be a hard bitch when she gets older.
Well,
she's already kind of like a hard ass right now.
And that's the thing. Maureen has to silently absorb the bullshit of her father's sexism
and the generation sexism.
The generation sexism in general, because here's the thing. She's not just dealing with her family sexism through her father. She's dealing with what's the word I'm looking for?
Just misogyny as a whole.
No, she's dealing with a form of industrial bigotry.
I suppose universal sexism, really, because
by industrial bigotry, I'm referring to when a bigoted behavior like sexism or racism or homophobia invades an industry. And then policies inside of corporations or government bodies or things like that, when those things begin to reflect those bigotries, that's when it becomes industrial bigotry. And so she has to not only deal with the sexism of her father telling her, literally every time she expresses a dream.
He's like, that's nice, dear, or he ignores it.
No, it's not even that subtle.
Completely he's done it both ways. He's done subtle ones, and he's also been like, girls don't work with computers or girls don't do that.
Yeah, and he shoots her down like
immediately.
Like he's trying to be sweet to her, like he's patronizing
her.
From his perspective, he thinks he's trying to tell her the right thing based on what his time period was. He's doting
on his little girl, but really he's just being a patronizing dick that that's going to motivate her to do what she wants to do anyway.
Right, but then she deals with situations like when she goes on the game show, she can't even get him to watch a game show or to get people on the show to respect her as a female because she's smart.
Not only is she a female that wants to work, but she wants to work in an industry that is already a big deal. Like it's computers, it's NASA, all that shit. And that's already intense. So trying to get in there as a woman was already really difficult. What I think the worst is probably going to happen to Maureen, the worst I think would happen to her is that she might grow up to be a little bit hardened by this.
Yeah.
She might just be more business sense bitchy.
Yeah.
But
and
honestly,
the girl is 9 years old. The fact that she's able to
she's so confident.
Perceive the things that she can.
She is,
and she just swallows this shit because she has no choice. And that's the whole.
She's so clever. Is she 9? Is that
she's 9 years old?
How old's Bill? 11?
Bill is 3 years older than
So that would
Sue.
make him
so he's,
than Maureen. So he's like.
Than Maureen. Yeah. So he's 12.
God, that's why Maureen's my second favorite. I like Kevin the best because I understand and relate to his teenage angst. I do relate to Maureen on the level of being patronized and being the youngest and the only girl.
Yeah.
But I know from experience that doubt, and it's not just for sexism, but just being doubted in general can really be especially for women. I notice with female-minded people who lean more the animus.
Yeah.
Are more motivated by that. People who lean more anima typically aren't.
But additionally, for those who are confused by the animus reference, we are a very Jungian household.
Yes, we are Jungian psychology nerds.
The great psychiatrist Carl Jung came up with a concept called the anima and the animus.
Which is also like yin and yang, which is male and female energy.
It's essentially the exact same concept but renamed. Essentially, his theory was that all humans, no matter the gender, have a masculine and a feminine energy to them. Depending on the person you are, you can either lean one way or the other way, more or less. And depending on how far or little you lean toward one or the other, it can have some personality variance, and it accounts for a lot. For example, it explains why you could be, for example, a gay person with a very masculine personality, or like a straight person with a feminine personality.
Basically,
or
what
things
it does
like that.
is it's the best way, I think, for the podcast for us to be more gender neutral and to be more respectful of people who are non-binary and people who are trans. Because what we try to do, instead of being like, oh, that's boyish, oh, that's girlish, or girls and men, I would just rather say anima or animus leaning, because you can be transgender AFAB or AMAB. I forget. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. And I
have trouble with the new terms.
Yeah. Sorry, I think it's AFAB and AMAB. But
please comment. And tell us which one it is.
Correct us if we're wrong, but it's like you could be either
we're trying
one.
To learn.
You could be either one and lean more one direction than the other. No one's one or the other. So we prefer just to refer to it as anima. Animus is a nice gender neutral way of saying it. Yeah. And it's just respecting everyone's identity.
Because it's not a gender reference. It's an energy reference.
Right. And we try to just respect everyone's identity here at Jug O Sip.
One of the things that I wanted to touch on when it came to the silent desperation, as a black person, they don't shy away from the silent desperation that black people had to live with during the 70s. And, it's different now than it was back then because different things have happened in the country since then. But the 1970s was a particularly pivotal time for black people because the civil rights movement that's 60s. That's not even a full decade away. like it happened based on where the Efforts for Family is taking place. The civil rights movement started and ended and happened. And all of those heroes like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and so many people in the Black Panther movement were murdered and disappeared and discredited. It happened so recently that a lot of those people it's like they saw them just yesterday, almost literally for a lot of people.
Yeah. And
there's a character in it named what is his character's name?
Which are you talking about Smokey or?
No, not Smokey. It's Chauncey Roosevelt.
Rosie. They call him Rosie. That's.
Yeah, his nickname is Rosie, but his full name is Chauncey Roosevelt.
Because they have a couple of cool black characters on that.
Right.
They touch on stuff.
He's I'm just going to read it off of fandom here. Chauncey Rosie Roosevelt is a recurring character on Efforts for Family. He is a man who works at the airport as a shop steward and a baggage handler and is a close friend of Frank Murphy. He is voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson, who's one of my favorite voice actors.
That's crazy. I didn't know that was him. That's crazy.
That's him. That's Kevin Michael Richardson.
You don't even recognize. No, he's great, but they touch a lot on the race relations of the 70s, and there's no of anything in general. They don't try to pretty anything. In any kind of relations. They have a neighbor that does cocaine all the time and has orgies.
In the case of Rosie, he deals with institutional. I said industrial before when I said industrial bigotry. I meant institutional bigotry.
I was like, I never heard of that one. Fuck it.
Yeah.
I was like, mate, you know more than I do.
He deals with institutional racism, meaning his job, he can't get a raise. He can't get past baggage handler because the person who's in charge of the airport that he and Frank work at.
Piece of shit.
He's a fat asshole. Shit, yeah, but he's incredibly racist. He's crazy. Ooh. Lindsay, okay?
Oh shit.
You all right?
My coffee went down the wrong pipe and came out my nose.
Oh, it came out your nose? Oh, you got it. You be all right? Damn. I hate when that.
Please stand by.
She drinking coffee and came out her nose.
No, that was like the most metal thing ever. I was like trying to discreetly drink my coffee quietly, and it went down the wrong tube, and I started coughing.
Yeah.
And I just spit it on the fucking floor. I was like, ah!
Well, it happens.
We don't make anything pretty or fake here at Jug O Sip.
No. Can
you hand me that water, please?
Yeah, here you go.
Starting to sound like those women from West Virginia I grew up with. I was the sexy one in the family. Everybody said my meth tooth was hot.
My meth tooth.
Hell, that voice is easy when I had to choke on coffee. Maybe I should do that more often.
Yeah. But so yeah, back to Rosie. So Rosie can't get a raise inside of the airport because his boss is incredibly racist. Rosie also deals with things like being forced to go to a segregated bar that's in a low-income area.
That's right. People. He does go to I first thought he went there voluntarily, but it does make sense that it was.
I think there's a whole.
I thought he just went there because it was like he felt safer or something.
I think there's a whole thing where he actually runs for comptroller, I think, or something like that.
He ran for some sort of like government thing.
Yeah, he runs for a government-appointed job because he felt that he can help change the community for the better by getting into one of these jobs. But every step of the way, he has to deal with this. And there's actually one moment that hit me really hard, as a black person. The moment was basically Rosie went on strike. He was going to quit. Like the racism had gotten so rampant and obvious and blatant that he couldn't deny it anymore. And it was the kind of thing where he had to do something about it if he wanted to provide for his family, because it wasn't like... His
wife even said something. She was like, you have to ask for a raise. You have to do better because we're not doing well here.
Yeah, and what ended up happening is he was talking to Frank about this, and Frank was asking him, well, you're going to show up again to the job. And Rosie was like, of course I'm going to show up. Here's the thing. I'm a black man in this country. They know it. I know it. And they know that I'm... entirely my position is way too desperate to not afford to not be at that job. I have to go because my opportunities are so low. And I was talking to Lindsay about this earlier today.
It's awful.
The thing that a lot of people don't understand about the position that black people are in, because it's not really something that's easy to articulate, because of America's relationship with black people. Essentially, what ended up happening is that black people became barred from industries, and slavery is a direct result of that, because when the South lost the Civil War, a lot of the wealthiest people, I'm talking like the Mark Zuckerbergs of their day, were the slave owners, the cotton plantation people of the South. These people were actually in charge of the major industries of the world. It was to a degree that the 40 acres and a mule that was promised to black people was actually used as a bailout to a lot of the former Confederate, like the former rich Confederates that lost the war. This is the reason why black people didn't actually get that.
And a lot of those families are still in charge of industries too, to this very day.
Well, and that's the thing. These families took the riches that were won or were taken as a deterrent by the U.S. government, and they some of them took their plantations and they turned them into prison camps, and they started they started finding what were now free black American citizens. And based on the loophole of the 13th Amendment, that being, well, not the loophole, but that being that slavery can only exist basically in prisons, they started capturing and imprisoning black people in order to put them back in a basically a remixed version of slavery, which is why the prison system as it exists today looks the way that it does. Right,
which is like a lot of systems. Like, for example, if they find a way for black people or whatever oppressed group, like women, for example, with Roe versus Wade, for example. When Roe versus Wade happened and we got the right to have abortions, they're trying to find new loopholes to keep us from having them. Right. It's like black people, when they were slaves during the slavery period, when they were freed, they were like, well, we got to find a way to make sure these black people can't get nothing that we have. Right. So if we can't hold them hostage in our houses, let's find a way to have them arrested.
Essentially, the bigotry built around those industries, again, industrial racism, those industries were placated on racism. And because those industries controlled economics in such a broad way, those industries control culture. So the racism that came with those industries infected the culture, and that led to many of these very wealthy people who descended from white slave owners, or people who didn't, just people who weren't black, that they developed a negative association with black people as a result of the American culture. Right. And it created situations where if a black person was trying to be a decent citizen and try to get a job, usually they were barred or segregated. And in the most extreme and most horrific examples were examples where if black people tried to make their own businesses, they would either be white collar or crime forced out of it. They would be what black people refer to as red taped, were essentially bureaucratically forced out of their possessions through a series of backdoor politics that we couldn't possibly be a part of. They would find any
way to fuck you guys as much as possible.
Or what would end up happening is events like the Tulsa, Oklahoma bombings, where they would literally... The Tulsa Massacre. The Tulsa Massacre, for those who don't know, there was a small district in Tulsa, Oklahoma that was referred to as Black Wall Street. And it was many black-owned businesses, black-owned banks, and it was just a town. It was basically just a town that was a high population of black people, something like 95% black people. Just live safely. They were living safely as decent citizens. The white people nearby did not like this because it's America, and they basically faked a race riot and had the town destroyed. In fact, there are sources, and I have to reconfirm these sources, but there are sources that say that there was a military weapon that was tested and used for the first time on this riot.
It was a bomb, I think. I'm not sure.
The last time I read about it, and again, I may not be remembering this correctly, but the last time I read about it, I believe it was napalm. It was some kind of firebomb. It was
some sort of fucking firebomb. Yeah, and that's...
But they firebombed this town. But this is what I'm talking about. Yeah. Throughout the years, black people have struggled to establish themselves and have an infrastructure that allows them to have the same kind of economic freedoms to take advantage of the country from the point that we got here, because essentially our role here was never to be economically free. No. It was an economic role of indentured servitude.
White privilege is in like literally everything, which is like a huge thing. All of this racism and all of this white privilege is literally so embedded in society, it's like blood seeping into fucking soil. It will never be able to be completely removed. Well, and if it is, it's going to take a long ass time.
That being said, this is the thing that Rosie is dealing with. Rosie is one of many black people who felt the aftershock of institutional racism, where the institution itself has geared itself to block black people from entering or rising. If they did enter, they won't rise beyond a certain point in an industry. Even right now, Harlem's going through a gentrification problem. That's another example.
That's a huge thing. That's been an ongoing problem for a long fucking time since you were a kid.
What, in Harlem?
Yeah,
it has. That's a widespread version of the problem. But that being said, Rosie is another example of how racism made him silently desperate to provide for his family, be a decent human being, just be seen as an equal human being. Now, one of the people I wanted to talk about in the show, two of the characters, are characters by the name of Ben and Kenny.
Oh my God, yeah, those two little boys.
Here's what fascinates me about Ben and Kenny. These are two little boys who they basically wander around almost homeless. I'll pull it up here for you.
No, I want you to look up the another character, but I can do it on my phone actually.
Okay,
that's easier.
Ben and Kenny. These are two. They're not homeless. They're like very hillbilly characters.
Let me explain what these kids are. So I grew up in a small town, and I actually knew a lot of kids kind of like Ben and Kenny. They're not homeless. They grew up very poor. A lot of kids in my hometown, they grew up poor. Their parents weren't really paying attention to what they were doing, so they were kind of just running around doing stuff.
Right.
I had one girl that I literally was really good friends with that would be wandering around our town at 10 o'clock at night with another little girl when she was 9 or 10 years old because her parents didn't give a fuck where they were.
Yeah.
Ben and Kenny are the kids that grew up impoverished. You don't really even know who the fuck their caretakers are. You don't know if they have parents. And they're always wandering around. One of them is 7 and still wearing a diaper.
Yeah.
They're not clean.
There've been multiple scenes of
severely neglected kids.
There've been multiple scenes of them pissing blood.
They have poor education. I don't think they ever go to school.
They don't ever go to school. No. They basically live in the trash of the town, like the alleyways and outskirts of the town. They just wander around them.
And they're not bad kids. They're just, because they're so severely neglected, they don't really have social cues. They're not very well educated. They just generally just need someone to give them a bath and teach them how to read.
Now, the fascinating thing about them is that they seem to be the only characters that are immune to this silent desperation that seems to be permeating every other person in the show.
I don't think they have enough education or life experience to know why they should be unhappy. I think that's what it is. I think ignorance is bliss in these kids' cases.
But that's what I'm trying to say. I think the show is using them as their contrast to the other character to make a statement about how the country operates. If you're a person living in the United States in any era, the more blissfully ignorant you are to the realities of this country, somehow the country just seems better to you.
First of all, I didn't know Mo Collins voiced Ben.
Yeah,
but
she does.
There's actually a quote here from Ben that's watching two squirrels having sex, and he's like, "That's how Mama bought our Christmas tree."
Yeah, that's Ben. That's the older brother.
They sound very uneducated. They're they don't. These poor little boys have nothing, but they're the happiest, I think.
Shout out to Mo Collins, by the way.
Big fan of hers. For me, there's a character I want to touch on is Mr. Holtenwasser.
Mr. Holtenwasser. Okay. Oh, he's the
German guy. So they have this amazing German elderly man named Mr. Holtenwasser.
His name is
Otto.
Otto Holtenwasser.
Now, the interesting thing about Otto Holtenwasser is he is a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah.
But the kids in the town because it's a small town, have started the rumor that he was actually a Nazi.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The few times you really see him, he's sweet. He's a widow. He's late 70s, 80s. Just an absolute delight to have as a neighbor. Probably the nicest dude in their neighborhood. I would love to live next door to this old man.
Yeah.
And he's always so friendly to the kids, and the kids are terrified of him. And I think his silent desperation comes from the fact that he has gone through so much shit. He's in so much pain and so lonely.
Yeah.
And
because his wife died.
He cannot understand why people are afraid to talk to him.
Well, the man, he was a Holocaust survivor. And I've read a few books on the psychology that Holocaust survivors, a lot of them had. A lot of them, they came out of that horrible, horrible event.
It's awful.
With this kind of appreciation for life that is brilliant.
Most of the Holocaust survivors you see interviews of, or that if you ever had the opportunity to meet one, they're usually very sweet.
Yeah.
And they want to share their stories with you. They want you to do better, so nobody else has to experience that horrendous suffering ever again.
Because they've seen a very good example of how evil humanity have the ability to be.
And when you've lost so much, you really appreciate the the truth and beauty of life. Now, this poor man, could you fucking imagine surviving the Holocaust?
Right.
Having been through what he went through, he probably survived it when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And having your wife die and trying to make a nice life in a little town far away from that horrific event, only to have your neighborhood kids call you Mr. Hitler.
Yeah.
That is literally, like, my heart breaks for him a lot.
They call him the Nazi Mr. Hitler. They
Satan
call him
worshiper.
Hitler's little brother. They call him Mr. Hitler Burger.
Don't get me wrong. I don't fault the children. Every kid has an old person in their neighborhood they're afraid of. But the thing is, it's the job of the adults to take the effort and be like, you should really respect this man. He's been through a lot. But these adults have their heads so far up their own ass, they don't care what the kids are going through.
Right. Right.
Like if I lived next door to a German guy who was a Holocaust survivor, or even if I didn't know his story and kids were like, he's a Nazi, I'd be like, now listen, you don't know that. Maybe you should go talk to him. Maybe we should give him a chance.
The sad thing about Otto Holtenwasser. Yeah.
I'm not German, but I think that's how it's pronounced. But we can just call him Otto.
It might be Wasser, actually.
Holtenwasser. You're right, yeah. Holtenwasser, because it's the German. But still, okay,
But
Otto.
the sad thing about Otto is that the fact that he was a Holocaust survivor among all of these Americans who were basically a bunch of jaded, sad, angry,
entitled assholes who are upset they don't have the best car or the best house.
The fact that he survived the Holocaust and does his best to be positive in spite of all his horrific memories, he provides a contrast that reveals the fallacies of American culture. And every single person in the show is suffering from the fallacies of American culture. When it comes to Rosie dealing with institutional racism, you got Maureen dealing with sexism. Institutional and within her family. Then you have you have Frank dealing with just not having his expectations of what the American dream expectations not being met. You have Sue not being able to build a living without a man. Or her intelligence being demeaned and stolen every step of the way, and then looking at her daughter being terrified that this little girl is going to meet the same fate. You got Kevin, who's a brilliant creative mind, but because the world is so up its ass,
they aren't ready for good artists yet.
They're not ready for him, so he's going to have to struggle to be seen, and only after will he be seen will he feel relevant in the first place. And you got Bill, who, he's just a passive kid that wants to be, that wants to
loved and appreciated.
He wants to be loved and appreciated and live sensitively, but he can't do that because the world is so intense and full of negativity.
His father's so angry.
Right. And so,
there's one more person I didn't touch on yet, and it's not so silent later. Their desperation. Again, more spoilers coming. Win-Win.
Oh my God, Win-Win. She's probably the saddest. Probably. Second
to Otto, I think.
Yeah.
So Win-Win.
I got it right here.
And Win-Win. Is it Win-Win?
It's Win-Win.
Win-Win. Yeah, I want to make sure I pronounce it correctly. Is she Korean?
She is.
I want to make sure I have the right. Is she? Yes, pronounced Win-Win. She is
Vietnamese.
Vietnamese. I couldn't remember if she was Korean or Vietnamese. Yeah. It makes sense, Vietnam.
What messed it up is that because Frank fought in Korea, Chet fought in Vietnam.
Well, and also I think I've heard the last name Nguyen being a Korean last name. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. So,
but when it's Vietnamese, it's Nguyen. When it's Korean, you pronounce the N too.
With Nguyen, she is a wife of the probably shittiest fucking human being in the show named Chet Stevenson.
Played by
Vince Vaughn.
Yeah, and shout out to Vince Vaughn. You did an excellent job. I hate that person so much.
Yeah, like Jesus. Like, so he married this girl from Vietnam. He killed her fucking village and then married her. So that just shows what a piece of fucking shit he is. Yeah. So then over time, you start to see he's very abusive to Win-Win. Yeah. And Frank becomes friends with him because this dude's basically his hero as far as how he fought in the war. He was a pilot, which Frank wanted to be and couldn't be. So Frank had this adoration, and then Sue overheard him abusing Win-Win.
Let's call it what it is. Frank had a man crush on Chet.
Well, I said admiration, but it's the same thing. So basically he got obsessed with this guy, and then Sue was like, yo, your friend's abusing his wife, and he wouldn't hear it. But she was so badly abused, Win-Win eventually poisoned Chet.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it didn't fucking take.
It didn't kill him right away. But it permanently disfigured him, or it disabled him, and it's implied that he dies off screen later.
Good, fuck him. But Win-Win, unfortunately, a poor woman from Vietnam that literally saw white and could hear her family screaming and all of this shit during this bombings and stuff, went through all of this shit to be kidnapped by a white guy, forced to be married to him, to be abused by him, to poison him, only to go to prison. Personally, that bitch should have been let off.
Yeah.
Like...
The amount of women that...
And they wouldn't have taken her side because she was Vietnamese, and it was the 1970s. As far as they were concerned, she was the enemy. Win-Win
is actually one... Her story isn't told often, but if you look into, the real reality of American history...
And Vietnam specifically.
Not the sanitized version of American history. There were actually a lot of women who had their countries in Asia ravaged by America that ended up marrying men in the military just to get away from the horrors that same military committed. They didn't have any choices.
These are the people who have the most power, and they killed all of their families.
If I recall correctly, I think one of our favorite comedians, Joe Coy.
Oh, I love Joe Coy.
His mom. I don't think his mom's family wasn't destroyed or anything.
It wasn't probably
but she was in the Philippines, and she married an American man in the military to reap the benefits of the United States.
And I understand marrying an American guy in general to get out of a horrible situation.
Yeah.
However, in Win-Win's, it's so much worse because it was literally during a fucking bombing. Like, could you imagine someone coming in and obliterating your fucking country, your family, killing everyone you know and love to only fucking take you back to America, and with you knowing such little English, you learned all of your English from fucking TV?
Right.
If Chet didn't die and he were real, I would want him to be dead. Yep. I literally want to punch this fucking guy out. I felt so mad for her.
And Chet is such a narcissistic prick. He literally... she spoke up.
Prick is the best word, honestly.
She spoke up. Win-Win spoke up for herself briefly in public at a party.
Oh, yes.
At a social. It was like a dinner party, I think.
Yeah. I remember that.
And then when they got home, Chet told her that she's not supposed to be referring to her commanding officer like that. He tells her to think of him.
He grounded her from TV like she was a child.
He tells her to think of him like a commanding officer, like they're still in the field. So basically, he's forcing this woman to be reminded.
She's like a slave to him.
He's forcing this woman to be reminded of the trauma that ripped her from her family every day.
I would rip his fucking face off. Fuck that guy. Vince Vaughn, you did a great job playing him because I want to fucking kill this guy.
Vince Vaughn, first of all, we really love Vince Vaughn as an actor.
Yeah, I don't know anything about him personally, but his acting is great. But
you did if you're listening to this, Vince, you did a really good job on this character.
It's hard to play a character that fucking shitty.
And plus, it's also hard. It's like Leonardo DiCaprio in Django Unchained.
Oh God, he was so good in that.
But the fact that he. Look, Vince Vaughn and Leo, the thing that they have in common is they chose to be a villain to help tell a true story that a lot of people don't like to tell.
Well, and as an actor...
And that's a noble thing, in my opinion.
And as an actor, I'm dating a black man. I'm pro-black. I'm pro all of these things. I would have no problem starring in a movie like Django because I feel like it's very fucking eye-opening.
Yeah, it is.
12 Years a Slave, Django, any of that. It's uncomfortable to, say... the N-word and all this other hateful shit, but goddamn,
Leo certainly didn't like it.
No, and I would hate it. I would literally, if someone was like, I want you to play a slave master's wife, I'd be like, fine, but I'm giving money to the NAACP literally every fucking day. I want all of my assistants and everybody that I have on set getting paid that is black. I would try to give back to the community, but at the same time, you're giving back by telling that story.
Right.
It's so hard. But God, is it eye-opening and educational.
It is, because these are the stories. This is the thing about F is Her Family. And, we've been talking about the stories of this show. And the
characters. And
we don't want you to get it twisted. This is a comedy. This is a comedy show, but it's a dark comedy. It's the reason it's a good comedy.
There's a lot of truth.
Exactly. That's what makes it good. It focuses on uncomfortable truths that a lot of people don't like to acknowledge. And this is why this show is so brilliant. It's right up there with Rick and Morty and BoJack Horseman, but nobody talks about it.
Self-aware.
Nobody talks about how brilliant this show is. It's that amazing. And the reason why we need a show like that now, especially as millennials, is because what happened in the decade of the 1970s is so close and relates so poignantly to what what the 2020s are and have become, that if you can't understand the two of them, you're going to be doomed to repeat them.
Well, and here's the thing. I don't like watching anything period PC, even if it's a comedy, without truth. Because at the end of the day, and I want to just use this as a moment to share something. A lot of people say acting or storytelling is lying, but actually it's the total fucking opposite. When you are an actor or you are a storyteller, you are telling a truth, even if it's someone else's truth.
Yeah.
Even if it's a fictional truth, it's still someone's truth. When you're an actor, you're portraying a character. When Bill Burr portrays Frank, who is like totally not like him at all, he is telling the truth of what a 70s desperate father was like.
Right.
And that's what's so poignant to me. I like truth, and I like seeing this like stuff because it also helps piece together how, like Charles said, where we are today. Yeah.
Especially in when you're thinking about shows like this for a black person like me, this is an especially important show because when you're raised as a black person in the United States, you get two different versions of American history. You get the version of American history that white people are comfortable with.
And that they want to tell you.
And the version of American history
that is true.
That is actually true. And the problem with this disconnect is that America is responsible within and outside of itself for numerous horrific atrocities just to maintain its own existence.
Yep.
And it's a really messed up thing because these atrocities, part of the atrocity of these atrocities is pretending that they never happened.
And that's disgusting, personally.
Sanitizing people's history.
Whitewashing, literally.
There are history books that, and if you're a millennial parent, please pay attention to this. There are history books that are being printed right now where they try to refer to slaves as helpers.
Yeah, that's not...
Yeah, they're trying to rewrite so many aspects of history.
Trying to make it like slaves were people that they brought over to employ in a respectable way, like pay them and stuff, and that's not what happened.
Which is absolutely not the case.
That's the fucking reverse.
And all it does is, when you separate people from their history, what you're doing is you're creating unnecessary conflict. All of the people who don't understand how different the 1970s generation, the silent generation, all of the generations before them, the boomers, if you don't understand why they are, you don't understand how to live with the world that you are in because they defined the world before you did.
Context and nuance fucking matter. Yes. Always.
But you cannot appreciate context and nuance unless you're willing to investigate the realities of things. And America has made it very difficult to investigate the past.
They wanted this convoluted misunderstanding so people would be at fucking war with each other all the fucking time, and that's all it is.
And this is why we wanted to do an episode on F is for Family, because F is for Family is a show that fights to preserve that ugly past, even if it's from one decade, but an ugly past that America would rather forget, but it still lives with every day. We are defined by that decade and every decade before it and after it every single day. We live with it like it's still here, even though some bits of it have changed, some bits have not gone away, but things happen then that are important to right now.
And see, for me, it's a very cathartic show because, like I said, I was raised by a mom who raised me with 70s parenting, like, tactics.
Yeah.
So for me, it's very, like, therapeutic to see, like, wow, other people grew up like this. You're not alone in that situation. And it also shows you what's wrong with that type of parenting and that type of existence. What that taught me growing up with a mom who had the same values as Frank is silent desperation is not something I wanted to be a part of.
Right.
Whatever I wanted to go out and get and take it from myself within being good to other people and being respectful. This is why I have such a fuck it mentality, because I grew up with, oh my God, if you don't have this job or this car or this house, or if our house doesn't look like a fucking catalog, and you've seen my mom's house, looks like a goddamn Macy's catalog.
Yeah, her house, her late mom's house certainly is beautiful.
My family's house is gorgeous, but it's
gorgeous. It is such a beautiful...
no one should be fucking living there.
It looks like the magazines that my mom used to get in the mail when I was a kid. But the thing about that is that every single page was separate. These weren't the same house, but somehow Your mom found a way to turn all of those things into one house, and all you can...
And you didn't even see it when she decorated it.
Right.
Like, it's more homey than it even was.
But the interesting thing is that every time you walk into a different room, it's like you're going into a page of a different
catalog.
magazine. And that's why it feels like pieces of things that don't belong to each other.
That's why, again, with you knowing the history, not just about black people, but the 70s as a whole, knowing how people were before made me realize that's not what I wanted. You know, I want a house that's beautiful and decorated nicely, but lived in.
Yeah.
Do I care if I have kids and they get paint on a rug? No, because a fucking rug can be replaced. A fucking sofa can be replaced. But the joy of raising a family without trauma and fear of you is fucking priceless.
Yeah. And
that's what it really wraps around to. It's like the history lessons we learn and all of that.
And to touch on that's an important thing that, you know, we're millennials. And the thing is, with us millennials, we struggle with dealing with baby boomers. Because
and anxiety from it.
Yeah, and the anxiety from it, and the world that was created as a result of them. Well, for those millennials listening to this, let me just explain to you why baby boomers are like this. The silent generation, people like Frank Murphy, basically hammered into their heads that their dreams are going to die. Their dreams are going to die. Their dreams are going to die. Because the silent generation felt the weight of the American dream dying on them. What ended up happening is that for baby boomers, they ended up becoming so bent on having their dreams while simultaneously becoming somewhat entitled because of what the silent generation was also doing, that when their dreams were not realized the way that they wanted to, when the dreams weren't just handed to them, they started getting mean. They got angry and they got self-righteous. They started entitled, and this turned into them taking it out onto younger generations. First they did it to Gen Xers, and then they did it to millennials. The difference is that Gen Xers, they're more silent about it. They basically didn't pay attention to these arguments as often, but they
just shut down.
They essentially kind of shut down, sort of. They kind of became the next silent generation,
and
almost.
We got mad. There was
millennials, but we became outraged, and we became expressive about it.
And here's the thing: when their dreams weren't actualized, whether they wanted to be a famous singer or American hero or whatever, they started trying to force their kids into being a part of that dream instead of encouraging their kids to pursue their own fucking dreams.
Now, in defense of these people, of these baby boomers, you have to understand, as a millennial, we are experiencing and have the ability to take advantage of things that frankly did not exist back then. We have access to industries that were literally gatekept, impossible to enter unless you were basically born in it, and even then you were lucky to become anything.
Which is why boomers give such bad job advice for how things work now. It's a total opposite of how it worked now. So I understand that, and I'm sympathetic.
The world was so
sympathetic
different,
to that. But also, I'm saying this to millennials too, because we're going to get older. We're going to have fucking grandkids and shit. Be willing to grow every fucking day and be willing to be open-minded and let your opinions change, because what's going to happen is we're going to have kids, we're going to have grandkids, and they're going to do shit we don't like, but you know what, you got to shut the fuck up and let them live.
Cause we're reaching 1 hour mark. I don't want to talk their ear off too much. Like I personally don't. They can listen to you all the time because your voice is beautiful.
Oh, thank you, baby. Sure you.
But basically, I just want to say this: the silent desperation overall that this show is talking about comes from one thing. It's a change that they didn't want. And it's a change.
It came from fear. Really, that's what it boils down to, is fear.
They nothing really was becoming better.
No.
And that is the change that they weren't looking for. But as millennials, we are experiencing considerably more change than any generation that has existed previously before us.
Guys.
So far, if you were born, because I was born in 91. Let's just track people who were born in 91. Yeah, let's just track what we've been through. We've been through a couple of wars. We've been through impeachments. We've been through the first black president. We've been through the worst terrorist attack in history.
The first woman attempting to run for president.
First woman attempting to run for president. We've gone through recently a global pandemic. We've gone through an economic crisis. We've gone through
depression.
It almost became a depression. It was a recession.
That's what I mean. Yeah, recession. I mix those two up sometimes.
We have seen school shootings. We have seen internment camps come back. We
survived Columbine. Like, we lived that we're the Columbine generation too.
We've seen cults rise and become powerful. We've seen countries.
We've seen Nazis come back.
We deal with white supremacy in terms of neo-Nazis every single day.
On the surface.
When you think about the totality of what millennials live with every day, we essentially have lived with a compilation of every problem that has singularly defined
collective traumas.
The greatest generation, basically they had disease and economic crisis. We've had both of those. The baby boomers,
they had a recession, a gas crisis.
And they had a recession, a gas crisis, they had economic crisis, they had their dreams not being realized. We've experienced lots of that.
Which is, to get to our closing points here, just so I can what this boils down to, what this makes me think with this silent desperation thing is, don't repeat those mistakes. And this is the best advice I will tell everybody all the time, and I will repeat it. I don't care how many times you get sick of fucking hearing it. If you want something and it's not going to hurt anybody, or it's not obligatory that you don't do something, do whatever the fuck you want. Please pursue the dreams. If you want to do sex work, do sex work. If you want to be an actor, do things to do that. Even if your dreams are something as simple as, I want a family and I want to be a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad, whatever your dreams are, don't let anybody tell you can't fucking do it, because that's what that generation heard, and they let it really affect them.
It destroyed them.
And do not repeat those mistakes. Actualize your dreams today and what you want to do, so it doesn't ruin your fucking kids' lives.
Yeah.
And a whole other generation of kids in general.
Well, real quick. Excellent. Well said, Lindsay, by the way.
Thank you.
Real quick, I just want to say season 4 of F is for Family is coming soon. They recently released the trailer for F is for Family season 4 on Netflix.
Right.
All 3 seasons currently exist on Netflix.
You really should watch it. Honestly, if you haven't,
you need to watch this show.
Give Bill Burr some love for this. You
need to watch this series. And I'm really glad they got renewed, because I don't know how many people are out there watching this, but please watch this series.
These actors are amazing, and the people, and Bill Burr and all the people involved are amazing. They deserve all the watches you can give them.
Now, we would love to give you a release date, but we don't know, because an official release date hasn't been released. They just said spring 2020.
We will keep you posted.
I'm sure it's coming out soon, but that being said, we wanted to drop this just before it came out around that time.
So people have time to hype it up.
Yeah, so we get people to hype it up, because it's a great show. In terms of the podcast itself, our footprint online is pretty big, so you can just Google us now.
Yeah, you can just type in Jug O Sip, and it'll just come up. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're on all social media. We're everywhere. Basically anywhere you can find a podcast.
We're everywhere. We're not on Apple Podcasts yet, but it doesn't even matter, because we're going to be there soon, too.
Just if you Google us, we'll pop up anywhere. You can listen to us.
Just Google us. We're on YouTube. We're everywhere.
And if you follow us on Facebook or follow me on Facebook, I'm always posting links. And, I'm not always adding people on Facebook because, you run out of limits. But feel free to follow me if you already aren't.
Yeah. That being said, thank you for listening to us. This is a very passionate and difficult episode to talk about, but we will see you in the next one.
I had a lot of fun, though.
I have fun, too. And any last words?
No, I just want to say I love you guys. And remember what I said. Fuck it. Do what you want.
All right. See you in the next one, guys.
Bye.